Over the next 400 years, Palestine would be ruled by the Ottomans. So let's do some Ottoman history. The year is 1516. The Ottomans have just defeated Mamluks in the Battle of Marshtabik, and as the dying embers of the Ayyubid, Palestine along with Syria and Egypt is incorporated into the vast Ottoman Empire. Much of the Arab world was quickly incorporated into the empire, but Palestine was a bit different. It was divided into 3 separate administrative units or cities. The largest, Gaza, consisted of modern-day Palestine, Israel, and the southern half of Jordan. The middle region of Samaria was almost entirely rural, and the northern district of Jerusalem was quite small but incredibly significant. As these regions were quite disparate, local governors known as mutaisarf were appointed to rule in the name of the Sultan. In fact, religious minorities such as Christians and Jews were allowed a great deal of autonomy under the so-called millet system, which helped to maintain the peace and stability of the empire. But perhaps the most important thing to the Ottomans was the religious significance of Jerusalem. As the third holiest city in Islam, it was vital to the empire's prestige and power. And so the Ottoman sultans styled themselves as the custodians of Jerusalem, working hard to protect and maintain the city's Islamic, Christian, and Jewish holy sites. In fact, many mosques and churches were restored and maintained during this period, fostering an atmosphere of religious tolerance. But what about everyday life? Well, agriculture flourished, as did trade and market towns along the main caravan routes. Taxes were collected on trade goods and land, and the Sultan's agents worked to survey and reorganize land tenure. Roads were constructed and maintained, fountains and public works projects were built, and a number of khans or inns were constructed along the main trade routes. As the centuries passed, however, local rulers grew increasingly powerful and autonomous, even as the Ottoman central government grew weaker. In fact, in the early 19th century, there were several revolts in the region against Ottoman rule. But despite these pressures, the Ottomans implemented a series of reforms known as the Tanzim, which aimed to modernize and centralize the empire. But it was too little, too late. By the mid-19th century, European powers had designs on the weakening empire, and Zionist immigration to Palestine increased dramatically. Then in 1914, the First World War began. 2 years later, the British would invade Palestine with the goal of capturing Jerusalem. On December 11, 1917, British General Allenby would enter the city, marking the end of over 400 years of Ottoman rule. Just a few months earlier, the British had secured the region as part of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which divided the region between Britain and France. And so the British Mandate of Palestine would begin in 1920, which we'll talk about in another video. I hope you enjoyed this whirlwind tour through 400 years of Ottoman history. If you want to know more about the history of the Middle East, stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching.